Okay, if you check on your handouts, there's a second handout here, a second that you can download called House Keywords. It's just the extra keywords, some of the extra keywords that go for each of the houses, and that I may or may not use within the session. So you should have these two downloads. They're just down under the handouts, and I think mine I drop it up, but I think you can just go on and download it. Okay. Let me know by email if you can't download that. All right. So today we're dealing with Mercury. It's another kind of funny, curious planet that when you're putting it to houses, it can go a lot of different ways, or a lot of different ways it works. So it's when you start, as you start getting to the outer planets, it's much more clear what the energy and the choices you have, or the way the energy works. It's more blatant. Here, it's. I mean, Mercury is. It's the way we think. It's the way we communicate. It's the way we express ourselves. So, it's the way we process information. It's the way we coordinate. Even just moving a finger. That's a miracle. You know how much brain work it takes to just move one little fingertip like that, to go down your arms up to your brain, coordinate it, put it back, much less to raise your hands and talk or whatever. This is all Mercury. So the way we think, the way we communicate, the way we coordinate, the way we express ourselves. So it's not just how you express, because how we're coordinating is how agile we are, how coordinated we are, moving and doing things is Mars, but the coordination, that Mercury adds an extra quickness or alertness to it. So Mercury, when you go to the mythology, it's the winged messenger. But it's the planet that can reach up to the sun, it can go down into the depths. So it's, in mythology, it's one planet can go down into hell and communicate and talk, but it can, if it stays there too long, it can get affected by it. But normally, it can be indifferent to emotional. It can also be very affected by emotional patterns. But let's just see our attitudes and our style of thinking is already set by the sign on the Mercury. So there's 12 different specific ways or moods or themes of thinking or expressing that start prioritizing things we're alert to, or ways of being alert. But when we're going to the houses, we're not looking at the attitude to the planet. We're looking at how the planet affects these circumstances, how the planet comes down and meddles in worldly affairs, and consequently how we do. It's not necessarily Mercury is not understanding. You don't have to understand. It's just making sense and making connections and associating ideas. It's I guess you'd put it under the laws of correspondences and continuity. If this happens, then this will happen, and this will happen. So Mercury kind of makes up time in our own mind. It makes up time. If that happened, then this is happening, then what's going to happen next? And the part of us that speculates or assumes that a few things something here will lead to something there, or something related here is affecting to something there. We're always making the assumptions. I have the cup of tea. Okay, I got the cup of tea. I'm ready for my class. I got things. So it's always buzzing around. It's like our AM set that's just thinking around all the time about everything. So it does that for everyone. It just starts differentiating. As you go through the houses and the categories, we'll start to see how it differentiates a little bit. We're not going to see clearly, oh, Mercury in House, it just means this. It's not. It's like Mercury in House means this whole information gathering, this alertness, this way of making sense, making associations between these things, this whole mental matrix is in certain categories and is going to make the most of those categories, or is going to affect those categories. And so it's funny when you're trying to understand the mind with the mind through communicating and talking. There's a funny puzzle in this. Mercury doesn't quite get to your heart. It doesn't quite get your emotions, but it thinks it does. Yet the heart and the emotions can totally affect the way we think. Mercury is the one planet in moving around. It moves so fast, it touches all the other planets quicker than any of the other signs, and it makes those quick associations and adds them in. Oh, there's one more thing to think about. Oh, there's this, and we got to add this on, and there's this. It's always bad word. It's usually adding information and reassessing, assessing, reassessing, figuring out, expressing, communicating, thinking. But out of all the things you think about, all things you're going to express, what makes someone express more slowly? Well, that would be more the attitudes or the aspects to it. Or someone makes someone more quick or more agile. We all have our mind. We all have our way of making sense of it. And it goes into the DNA or the matrix of our being, the part that makes sense out of all the things going on. But it's also the parts that's in the making associations. So we all have our sense of relativity. I came from here and know so-and-so, you know, so I've been there, I've done that. This making things relative to each other and having this sense of relativity, that's Mercury. Understanding the implications of things is Jupiter, but making sense and seeing how one thing is relative to another, or one person is relative to another, well, that's Mercury. You know, so if you want to really, you get in a relationship, I'm with you and we're talking, we're always talking, we get all our little talking together, we get our expressions together. So we get our minds in sync, or we don't, and it stands out in its own bubble compared to, then other people come in and we're bouncing off how we're relating to people or to other people. If you don't have, but then if you split up or you're not with someone, you don't have that sense of relativity and your attention goes much more into what's going on, but sometimes it can be displaced because you're still thinking about something. Like when you have negative experiences, you're still thinking about them, and they can be brought into the equation of what's relevant now. You add some alcohol or drugs and oh boy, you can get lost for a long time thinking everything you think is true and it's not. So Mercury is not about what's true or what's absolute. It's just how alert are you to what's going on around you? Or even how alert are you to what's not going around you? Or why bother being alert about what's not going around you? Different ways of expressing, different ways of communicating, different contents, different things we're more inclined to be talking about than not. So this is, as the Mercury comes down into the houses, we're seeing how it works in the world, how it affects, how we affect each other, sometimes the content, but you can't just say it's just this content, because Mercury is this whole bunch of things, but you can sort of see patterns. This wave is there, this pattern is there, this thing. So Mercury creates that diversity in any house it's in. It creates a curiosity where in every house it's in. You know, so like your alertness, your curiosity, you're making sense of these. All of these things are suddenly put into the affairs of that house. Now, if you're drunk and your Mercury's impaired, or you're stoned, or you're not thinking, or if you're really mega thinking, or sort of very lucid, and your mind is very very clear, you're putting that energy into that house, or in that attention into that house and affecting those affairs of the house. So you're getting almost a mental or a head start on those factors. In the spiritual path, if you're trying to get to heart or love, one has to quiet down the mind and get back to silence and not be following every thought that comes up, because it just keeps coming up. One more thing, one more thing, one more thing. You ever try to sit quiet with someone and they keep talking and you just want to be quiet a little bit? It's like visiting someone and they always have the TV on. It's always thoughts and words coming in. Very different thing than silence. So the mind can go it can be directed outward or inwardly. When we're looking at the houses, normally we're seeing it outwardly, but really that outwardliness at the same moment is a challenge of what we have. It's like that's the easiest things to think about, and we often have to work through those things to stop thinking about them to get to silence, or to get to our heart, or to at least let the heart guide the thinking. Usually it's our desires that guide our thinking, or our needs that guide our thinking, to get your heart guiding your thinking. Wow, heartfelt thinking, sincere thinking. That's not the normal quality, but that's the spiritual quality of thinking. So, puzzles. Mercury's curious. There's puzzles wherever Mercury is. So, the so we're going to ignore the attitudes and the signs, which is a huge influence on the Mercury, but we've done that with the signs. We're going to try and do it. Just going to look by itself, and later on, as you start putting the sign on the house, on the planet, then the planet in the house, and the aspects to it, you'll start to have a much more focused idea. But we've got to see how Mercury, as best as we can describe it, the mind and thoughts as best as we can describe it, our alertness as best as we describe it. What's going to happen? We have alertness on one side of our chart or the other side. What does it mean? You know, it's going to create the puzzles where you're looking at what it means, but also with it, you get a certain insight. Then when you see the implication, you say, wow, what's that mean? And then you start thinking about it and comparing, it becomes apparent how it works differently from one person to another, as you start seeing different people having different sides of this. So our first category is half of the sky is rising, half the sky is setting. The rising side of your chart, from the IC to the ascendant to the midheaven, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, 12th, 11th, 10th houses. That's the heart where that part of the sky is coming up to the midheaven. It's coming from the IC, from the deepest motivation point, and moving up to the ascendant, up towards the ascendant, and keeps going up to the midheaven to see how far out or how accomplished it can be. So we come from our personal secrets, our personal impressions, our personal deep motivations, and we begin to be alert to them. And there's a tendency to talk about them, to express them, or see what it means, or just be thinking about these personal impressions. And then it spreads out to the things around us, and how it relates to the things around us, how we're going to use the things around us, and who we are, how we got to look to be able to express the things we have, how it's going to integrate. So 3rd, 2nd, 1st house. Then then it's going to project out into the 12th house of the good and bad things to say. I have all sorts of things to say. A lot of people may not be interested. Can I tune into that or not? So the Mercury in the 12th is the 11th house. It's sharing ideas with friends and who knows who when it gets up to the 10th house of status and accomplishment. So this whole rising side, you're trying to impress other people with your ideas, with your alertness. You're not listening to make sense out of things. You're trying to express what you're coming from, where you come from, what you had to do, how you take it, and how you add in your mark to get someone to listen to you. So it gets to someone to listen to you is more outside, it's more social when it's above the horizon, but the rising is projecting your alertness. If you have your Mercury very low in the chart, like in the 3rd house or the 2nd house below the horizon, you're going to be alert to where you're coming from, to your motives, to your home, to the things you had to put together, you know. So you start going out above the horizon, and you start saying, well, yeah, geez, you never I had to go through this morning. I had to get through this and this and this. I had to do that, and oh man, spilled the coffee, and I finally got out the door, and go through. So that someone always has personal stories, generally when Mercury's below the horizon, but rising in that rising section. But as it goes rising above, the stories, there's still a need to speak and express yourself to affect others. It's not about there's a need to listen to others. There might be a curiosity to see what someone has to say, but even if someone is saying something to you, you're going to want to almost interrupt and add your take on it. Your take on it and your interpretation is what you're projecting out and what you're likely to put out and say to someone. So it can be two rising Mercuries can be almost competitive. They're each trying to influence each other, but neither one's necessarily listening. But they're only listening as much as they can get the next thing to say.